In the last lecture, I showed you that abjads, alphabets, and syllabaries, which are often discussed as three completely different things, are in fact sequences of letters that can be arranged either as rows or as columns, and that if we change the sequence of those columns, then we can get quite different looking alphabets, or letter bets, I should say. Well, in my introduction, I told you that really there are only three basic ways in which you can arrange letters. You can take the vowels first, and then the consonants, or you can take the consonants first, and then add the vowels at the end, or you can take the consonants and throw the vowels in between. And what we're going to do in this lecture is to try to make sense of the big picture of those three different ways of arranging letters. Just for fun, I'll take you back to Sumeria. So here are so-called Sumerian syllabic glyphs, and much in the way that we had with Aryabhata, we now have a series of vowels here, and I take them through a number of combinations. Here are some cases of vowels in front. So I start here in Brahmi with a series of vowels, and then I start with my ka, the various vargas, ka, ta, pa, ya, and so on. Here in Kharosthi, again, the vowels, now 5 vowels first, and again the same vargas. So we have, just as a general thing, vowels in front are normally called syllabaries. Vowels behind are things like Ogham and Yudaic, one of the versions of Hebrew. Vowels in between are the abugidas, the abjads, Arabic, Persian, Turkish, African, Cyrillic, Slavic, Aryan, abecedaries, or abecedaries, alphabets, Greek, Latin, English, and Ethiopian. And in terms of letter sequence, ABGD, ABJD, ABTH, TTH, ABVG, ABCD, and the one that we saw in the last 2 lectures, HL, HM, or Ha, La, Ha, M. Here is a chart of the development of Oricen and Oriya scripts. Again, we have a series of vowels and diphthongs. And then here, the consonants, and then combinations of the two. Here you have a history of Tamil script, again, vowels and then consonants, and then another alignment of the same. Here are some cases of vowels in front. So Egyptian hieroglyphs, which starts with a series of vowels, and here Avestan, which, like the Sanskrit, has 15, 16, 17, or 18. And then you have your various consonants following. Now we're in the Far East, and we have Tagalog, Alibata, where we have A, B, K, D, G, H, and so on, or Aka, Ga, Nga, and so on. And then here we have A, I, U, and we are again creating a syllabary of vowel sounds. Here we're with Meroitic, here we're with Cypriotic, and again, we start with the vowels, or now we have the vowels. No, we have the vowels here and the consonants there. Here is Yudaic, so now we have the consonants first, and the vowels at the end. A, I, O, U. Here we are in so-called a Chinese called Bopo Mofu, which again has the vowels at the end. And here we are in the characters of the Goths. And again we see it ends with A-E, O-E, O-I, now diphthongs. And here we have a runic alphabet ending with A-O-U-E-I. Remember this, we saw this aligned in terms of the points of the compass. So this is the first day of the year. This is spring equinox. This is summer solstice. This is autumn equinox, and this is the winter solstice, and then this is the next day, or this is the day before the winter solstice and the next day. And then here we see the diphthongs. And here we have a bit of Ethiopian, where we see that A, Alf, and Rein, so this is again, has all those vowels. And now, when the Hebrews first arrived in the so-called Holy Land, a land that we now call Palestine, they were, well, if you go back far enough, that was the land of the Canaanites and the land of the Samaritans. Well, those were provinces. That became the province of Samaria. But it was the Samaritan alphabet that became one of the first alphabets of the Jews before they went to Babylon in the 600s and then took on the Babylonian alphabet, as I've shown you in the previous lecture. Now, this alphabet is 22 letters and more or less as we're used to, Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, and so on, A, B, G, D. However, look closely, ladies and gentlemen, Aleph is actually the letters A, E, I, O, U. And if we go down to Rein, which is here, yes, it says A, E, I, O, U aspirate. So we're back to our A in Rein. And now, and so all this story about, oh, the Hebrews didn't have vowels, they only had consonants because they had abjads and so on, is not true. Because originally, they had an alphabet where two of the letters were the vowels, which, as we have seen, comes via the Ethiopian and the Abyssinian and so on. And if we go to this Syriac alphabet, and you look at these two letters, Aleph and Hoin, so the first letter and somewhere along, and this one, you can't see it in this because it's too small, but here, I've blown it up here, and what do we have? A, E, I, O, U, and Hoin, which is Hein, which is Rein, A, E, I, O, U. So there is a prehistory to the Hebrew story where the vowels were still all there. Well, here is a version. There was a gentleman in the 19th century who studied the Sumerian alphabet and argued that, in fact, the alphabet as we now know it comes from Sumer. And he gave the equivalents across the board. That is fairly convincing, but this is simply telling the story of how we go via the Silk Roads and how we go from India to Pakistan, Afghanistan, Eastern Iran, then Western Iran, and it's in Western Iran that we have Sumer, and then we go to the Babylonian cases. So other people have studied Akkadian, Ugaritic, and Phoenician and tried to show how those link. And others have shown that that links with ancient Arabian and even tried to link it to Brahmi. And then there are some of those very early alphabets like Proto-Sami of the shamans, Glosal, which is, again is in that part of the world that we now think of as Bulgaria, Serbia, and so on, and then Ionic and Proto-Greek. So just for fun, I've taken those 72 alphabets or sacred alphabets that were recorded and that were supposedly started at the time when the Bible was translated from Hebrew into Greek in Alexandria around 280 BC. And I have tried to list them under the 4 basic models of how you do alphabets. So the ABGD model, we get these. The ABCD model, we get Latin, English, Egyptian, Assyrian, Gallic, Germanic, I'm reading it in English now, Getic, Gothic, and Etruscan. The ABTH is Persian, Arabic, African, or Arabic, Persian, and Turkic. And then ABVGD is Cyrillic, Celestial, Kophiteum, Enoch, Jacobite, Seraphic, Servian, and Supercelestial. So, again, I was showing you that you can start with Hanscritanum and then look through the alphabets and realize that there are these recurring elements. So what are the recurring elements? One is the 3 letters in Sanskrit of AMS, which become the letters Aleph, Mem, Shin in Hebrew, Aleph, Mem, Shin in Phoenician, Aleph, Mam, Shin in Aramaic, Aleph, Mem, Shin in Arabic, Alpha, Mu, Sigma in Greek, and Esk, Mon, Sigil in the runes, or AMS in English. That's followed by 7 letters, of which 6, as we showed, fit into the 25 square thing, the BGDKPRT. And then we have 12 letters. So these link with the 7 planets, these link with the 12 zodiac signs. And now, if we were doing the 9 square version of the letter writing, then the central one would, in English, would be A, E, I. So all vowels, yes. If I do a 4 square thing, then the left column becomes A, E, I, O, U. And if I do a 5 square, then the vowels, the E, J, O, it gets all confused and it goes a little bit. So it depends on the letter grid that I'm using to see how it all works out. But we can see that the Arabic division, which is Abjad, Hawaz, well, they simply make a word of the combination of letters, yes? So they call this Abjad, Hawaz, Hati, Huti, Kalaman, Safas, Karashat, Takti, and so on. And then there it's written out. These are the numbers of the letters. These are the gematria values of the letters, so from 1 to 1,000. And these are the English equivalents. So ABGD becomes ABCD, HWZ becomes EFG, HTY becomes HIJ, KLM is the same, this becomes OP, this becomes the same, this is different, and that is different. So the Arabic ordering is somehow connected with a much older system. And if we go to the Anglo-Saxon runes, we see again that there are 10 letters, That's followed by 3 letters, AMS, which we know about, yes, and which you can reduce to 1 letter, Hamza. And then the BGT, the 7 letters, and then another 12 letters, so 3, 7, 12. And so the same underlying structures can lead us to a 22 letters alphabet by taking 3, 7, and 12. If I add another 10, then I get 33. So what looks at the first sight as totally different, well, of course, the way we write the letters, the scripts are totally different. But we saw we can take the Sanskrit structure, keep the precise structure, and one day write Thai script for it, another day write Gupta for it, another time write Khmer for it, and really go all through Asia. And we're seeing in the West, too, that what starts as looking a total mess is actually, at the level of deeper structure, a series of simple combinations of bits. Well, even the 10 stems of the Chinese can be related to English letters and English numbers. And some people have argued that the 10 stems and the 12 animals lead you in another way to the 22 letters, and that this may in fact be the ultimate source of where the 22 letter versions of alphabets come from. Here I take you to the alphabet of Cadmus, which is one of the earliest versions of Greek, and Phoenician. And there are parallels there again. Here I come, in one of the early lectures I showed you Frankicum, Saxonicum, so early versions of English. Well, now I add some more. And so here is Latin in the year 1, 306, 400, 500, 500, 500, 388, and 400. And you can see how the letters that we now know from school go through a whole series of combinations as we go through the centuries. So this is a kind of first glimpse of that kind of history of letters that I was talking about. But this is now just in terms of major European languages and not doing it, linking it with Sanskrit and the Russian roots and so on. Here is an 19th century chart that is doing this for a series of old, so Etruscan, Phoenician, ancient Gallic, and so on. And you can see here are the familiar letters, and here are the variants thereof. Another example of what that dictionary of letters would look like. And for fun, I've taken here 4 of the early 72 sacred alphabets. So Gallicum, so French, Hibernicum, Irish, Germanicum, and Scoticum, Scots. And here is an 18th century map that shows you the major letters in the 18th century that were connected with Europe, of which we have the Latin, Italian, Gallic, Hispanic, and Greek, and English, and Scots and Irish. But we also then have the Slavonic, and you see here one series linking with Glagolithic and those sets of letters, one leading to the runes in the north, and then a variant of the Slavonic. And so what we think of now as a single European Union is actually a conflation of a Nordic tradition, a tradition that starts in Greece and Rome but has its roots in India, and another one that has Nordic roots. We'll come back to this map and the other 4 maps for the whole world in chapter 12. Just for fun, slightly to be provocative, in my first lecture, I told you about the Slavic roots. And I told you that there was an alphabet, well, which is actually on the cover of my book, that was an old alphabet. If we believe the stories, it may go back to 600,000 BC. In 103,000 BC, when Asgard changed its name to Omsk, it turned to what is now Middle Asia. And around 11,000 BC, it got put into a form of that big chart, which we saw in the introduction. And then there were various subsets of that produced in the next centuries, and I showed you some of those subsets in chapter 4. Well, just for fun, I thought I'd take some of those subsets and show you that the form of the letters that we now associate with English, so I start with A, B, C, D, E. F is complicated because it's a theta or a phi. And of course, we know that the F, as in fetu, or fehu, is already in the Egyptian magical alphabets and in the runes. But then G as a gamma, and this form of G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, and this form of S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So ancient Russia, ladies and gentlemen, provides us with the actual shapes of all the English letters. Now, I'm not saying that, they took the Trans-Siberian Express and went to Paris and dumped them there and created the alphabet that way. That would be a little too simplistic. But the truth is that there is a complex history that we've forgotten because these some of them very unfamiliar shapes are connected with shapes that we take for granted as being purely Western and in some cases purely English, which is simply not, because the English ones clearly come from the Greek and the Latin. But the Greek and the Latin, although the normal story is that, yes, there was something called Byzantium in the 9th century to monks Cyril and Methodius studied Greek, took the symbols and created the Cyrillic alphabet. But we now see that long before the Cyrillic alphabet, possibly 11,800 years before the Cyrillic alphabet, there was an earlier alphabet which provides us with the basic forms that we now think of as the alphabet forms. So in an attempt to see how this links, I thought I'd take 11 letters of Egyptian. Well, what do we have then? Then we have A, B, G, E, K, M, N, O, R, T, S. If I have 22 letters, then I have A, B, G, well, basically the first 5 of the Abjad series. If I have 15 letters of Egyptian, I have this, and that gives me it's basically the same as the Abjad structure. 25 letters of Brahmanicum, A, B, G, D, K, L, M, N. Already here, we have some of those building blocks that we have in the Abjad. So here, in each case, I have the Abjad, yes? 26 letters of English. So the A, B, C, D, the K, L, M, N, the Q, R, S, T are the same as the Abjad. 33 letters of Bulgarian. This now becomes A, B, V, G, D, but the K, L, M, N is the same. And this one, we omit the Q, but the RST is the same. 44 letters of Cyrillic, the KLMN is still the same, and the RST is still the same. 50 letters of Cyrillic, the KLMN is still the same, and the RST is still the same. Well, and then here I have a section on the letter Aleph. So one letter, which as we saw is A, letter 1, 12, 5, 17, if we spell it out. Well, there is a whole Kabbalistic study of that, so mystical study of that, so the one letter generates whole philosophies. And the letter M, we see in the earliest, so I'm now going through the AMS, as those three letters that we associate with Hamza or Amza. So here you see it in the earliest ruins. Here is an early version. In that early Russian alphabet, it's linked with the numbers 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 as now a mother Vitruvian figure, as Ma. And remember, there's an A and an M, and if I put those together, I get Ma or Amma. And so the A and the M are connected that way. Here you see yet another version of doing M. Here is the Yudzism version of the world turtle, now with 3 elephants. And in India, you add an elephant, and then you change this into the Saptaloka. And we saw that whole history there. Here is a Russian world elephant, now linked with the 12 zodiac signs. And here is a Hindu world elephant called the Kurma. And we also saw that there is an abbreviated version of this where the central part becomes 9 squares and leads us to the magical squares thing. So there are deep underlying metaphors, like the turtle as the basis of the universe, that we find in all the great cultures. And the S, well, here we have a Nordic pentagram, and here we see the downward triangle, and then we have the what we will call Taurus. Here we see a variant on the Vesica Pisces. Here we see S, and then with one line through it. Now this, of course, is the S of the sun, but it's also the Seisha, and the S that is stigma that gets reversed. So one way of doing it is to say S and S with a line through it, or we do 2 S's and that becomes Spiritus Sanctus, or we do it this way and it becomes a $sign. And, or we do it in terms of 2 columns, and these become the columns of Hercules. And those 2 columns then also become the Yachim and Boaz. And also, if we put a column in the middle, then these become the 3 columns of S again, of Sam, as we saw in an earlier lecture. Now, when we start to look at the Slavic alphabets, they're all related, but there are 2 fundamental, well, there's one fundamental difference. So there's one superficial difference and one profound difference. The superficial difference is sometimes it's ABCD, sometimes it's ABVGD, and sometimes it's ABVHGD. The second difference is already apparent here. In some cases, I just have one version of each of those letters. In Polish, I have 2 A's, 1 B, 2 C's, and 1 D. In Slovene, I have 1 A, 1 B, 2 C's, and a D. In Czech, I have 2 A's, 1 B, 2 C's, and 2 D's. So the same basic sequence, but the number of versions of the letter varies tremendously. I'll come back to that in a minute. Oh, just for fun, I take you to Sanskrit because of the numbers. So 1 is Aka, Eka, or 1. Diz is 10, from which we get French 10. 10 is zata or zata matra. 100 is zata or zata matra. 1,000 is zahas, as in Sahasrara chakra. And then 10,000 is dasas ashrika or ayuta. 100,000 is laksha, from which we get Lakshman. And then para is 10 million, akshita is 100 million, and maha yaha is this enormous figure, and katal is this figure. So what's fascinating is, although we think of, well, in Europe we say, oh yes, there's the decimal system. The decimal system was introduced by Simon Steven in Holland in the 1580s. Well, here we are, probably 3,000 or 4,000 BC, and we have words for this amount of numbers at a time when Europe didn't even know that there was a zero. So there is a lost history, ladies and gentlemen, that we need not only to learn to count on our 10 fingers, but in a universe that is a lot bigger. In the chapter on breathing, I showed you very quickly downward triangles and upward triangles, and since they were linked with letters. Well, here is the same thing. Now the letters are spelt out, and the gods connected with them spelt out. And this is one of the ways of presenting the tablet, showing you the Egyptian figures as well. So we have an abstract form where it's just letters or sounds, then sounds and gods, and then what just looks like a picture, and if we didn't know the principles, we just say, oh, well, another one of those Egyptian drawings. And one of the great challenges for us is that it's as if we needed, you know, in those science fiction movies, you put on X-ray glasses and you can see all the special things in people. Or well, of course, the customs people do this and see what's underneath our jackets, etc. But what we need is, in fact, a set of glasses that I can look at this, and it's a kind of augmented reality, that I can see what are the letters involved, what are the numbers involved, what is the geometry involved. And so what looks like just a mess or a very complicated picture becomes, in fact, a series of levels of understanding of what's involved. And that, I think, is one of the great challenges in the coming decades, or perhaps centuries, who knows. So just for fun, I take a series of 12 to 33 letters and show you how those are combinations, or here are some of the combinations. So it's 6 letters and 6 letters, 5 letters, 5 letters, 5 letters, 5, 5, 5, 5 to get 20, or 8, 8, 8 to get 24, or 11, 11, 11 to get 33. And as we saw for Sanskrit, there was also a version that I can do 5, 5, 5, 5, 7 fives to get 35, and to then get to go from the Mahabhutas all the way to Shiva and Shakti. I can take letters 11 and 22, and in terms of the Chinese thing, link them then to degrees of the circle, to their gematria, to, that would be ta and fa in Sanskrit, kaf and tav in Hebrew, kaf and ta in Phoenician, kef and te in Arabic, C and C in Turkic, letters 10 and 21 in the tarot, strength and fool in the tarot. So the same basic idea, that I can take letters, see them where they fit in in terms of the geometry, the direction, and then in terms of their symbolism. Am I dealing with a fool or with a wise man? Am I dealing with something in the north or the south? Am I dealing something in the summer or the winter? And so I could just turn my glasses on and say, I want a seasons version of this, and see where it goes that way. Now, I said there were two major things that happened with the Slavic alphabets. As I said, we're trying to understand the underlying patterns. So the one is that some are A, B, C, D, others are A, B, V, G, D. And I showed you that some of them have one A and then the other have two A's. Well, now, just for fun, I take you to 14 alphabets, Cyrillic alphabets, that have between 51 and 97 letters. And you will see that almost all of them are A, B, V, G, D, except for this one. But now look at the difference. Here I have two A's, two B's, 1, 2, 3, 4 G's, then two D's, no, and then three D's, yes? Here I just have A, B, G, D. But if I go down here, I have one A, two B's, a whole series of G's, and then D's, and so on. So the same basic sequence, but the number of letters that I have within that, it's as if I was doing your Aryabhata syllable. It's as if I was taking a combination of your basic Sanskrit structure, and then for some of them doing a syllabary. And so what becomes, what is a 33-letter alphabet if I just use the single letters? If I add the syllabary version for some of them, but not all of them, then I suddenly have 74 or 60 or even 97, and in some cases well over 100 letters. And so again, what on the surface looks like, if I look at these alphabets in isolation, I say, well, Rutul is very different than Agul, Kanti, Lak, Katapassaran, Abkhaz, Adigye, Kabardi, Anabaza, Kinalug, and Arki. But if I look at underlying structure, I say, they're all A, B, V, G, D, except only one of those drops the D and the B, and all the rest are simply variants on the principle. And suddenly, the very complex suddenly becomes quite simple. So this list is interesting in another way, because we have A, B, V, G, D. Now, in Sanskrit and in Nepali, if you have the word Shiva, you often write it S-I-B-A, where you mean to say, or we're used to hearing, S-I-V-A. Well, of course, in Greek, I go A, alpha, beta. In Coptic, I go alpha, vita. So, but in the languages of the Slavic tradition, I go A, B, V, so I have both versions of, it's like saying alpha Siba, alpha Ziva. And so I have both versions of the B sound, and then continue to the other letters. Here I take you to two versions of the, coming back to this, remember we said that when we got to the Indus Valley, that the letters which had been written from left to right also got a version writing right to left. And here you see Sindhi written in Sindhi Devanagari, starting here and going this way, and Sindhi Arabic going this way. And so here you have 51 letters, and here you have 53 letters. And here you have Dari Arabic going this way, but there are also Daris going the other way, and Pashtos. And here I'm comparing the 32 letters of Dari and the 28 letters of Arabic. So you have a basic sequence, but you can easily add further numbers, just as with the Slavic, where we saw that you have an alphabet which is normally 33 letters, but can easily be 51 letters, 68 letters, or even 97 letters, and in some cases over 100 letters. Now, this takes us back to, if we go back to the roots, it goes back to basic distinctions in Hindu words. We have invisible words called vak, and visible words called Gaurivak or Darshavak. The invisible words are uncreated, the visible words are created, the invisible words are white, the visible words are black. And there are 6 basic scripts in India. The 5 times 5 gives us 25 letters. That's the Sankhya school, which, as we showed, links up with the 25 tattvas, and if we go to Greece, links us up with the 25 stoicheia, or elements, that we have for the Greek alphabet and Greek philosophy. 6 times 6 gives me 36 letters, that gives me Shaiva. 7 times 7 gives me 49 letters, gives me Maruta, and also the 49 Maruts, or wind gods. 8 times 8 gives me 64 and gives me the Kala. And then 6 times 3 plus 6 times 5 gives me 289 letters, which gives me the Vijnana Vak. And then between 10 to the 3rd and 10 to the 4th, so between 1,000 and 10,000 letters, well, that's the script of China beyond Vyoma, which is their word, which is a Sanskrit word for Tibet. So while the West makes a clear distinction between alphabets, normally 22, 24, 26, 28 letters, and Chinese, which it says has nothing to do with letters, the Sanskrit model sees this in terms of multiples of the squares of letters and includes China in the game. So just to end this section, I show you some, here is 33 letters of Ashoka with Brahmi, and here you have 33 letters of Coptic. The ordering is slightly different, but the basic idea of having a systematic treatment within a certain number of letters is constant. Here I take Old Bulgarian, Karvaticum, which is from which we get Croatian, Dalmaticum, which is Dalmatian, which we usually associate with 101 Dalmatian dogs, but it's really the Dalmatian coast along Yugoslavia. And here you get Illyricum, or Illyrian. Well, the way you present the letters differ, but the basic ordering principle is the same. And here I have some tables from a remarkable gentleman called Amanjolov, and he shows you now some letters that in the order that we know them today, or that we're familiar with. But here we see the runic versions in different styles. And at this point, for example, here we're back to that funny little symbol that we saw as the male symbol in the very opening slides. So to show you that the letters that we now associate with standardized alphabets are linked with these different kinds of sign symbols that vary tremendously, and even for a single one, for example, the female, remember the female sign? There it is in the midst of a whole series of alternatives. Some that look like fish, some that look like a circle, some that look like a modified triangle, and so on. And finally, coming back to, this is the Armenian letter pyramid, and I told you that you take basic shapes and then you mirror them and you create new letters. And that was one of the basics of how you do the Cree syllabary and also the Inuktitut, which is the alphabet or the syllabary of the people that we now call or we used to call the Eskimos. Now here, for fun, I show you an old Latin alphabet, and if you look closely, you will see that the B, the D, the E, and the F are all mirror letters. That is to say, not only is there a mirroring here to create letters thousands of years ago, when I get to early Latin, almost each of the letters has a mirror version. Here I am in Phoenicium, in two versions, and then here in Doricum, and again I see the E and the Z being mirrored. Here I see H and D being mirrored in various, here Q and R, and in some versions I have a phi in between. And so we are summing up the way that we make letters. So we start by having a symbol, then I take bits of that symbol and arrange it in different directions, and I create a Chechen alphabet, or a Cree alphabet, or a Cree syllabary. And then I take subsets of that to create a smaller alphabet of 20, well, we saw how 33 goes to 26 goes to 22. And then in that subset, I take letters and again do mirroring and to create variants of the sounds. And so the whole process is one of taking a complex thing, making it simple, adding it again to making it more complex, and then mirroring it and sometimes shifting the direction to change it from a lowercase to an uppercase, as we saw with the Celtic runes. And this way, what at first seems as a total confusion between the Slavic, the Sanskrit roots, the Middle Asian roots, and the Middle Eastern roots, now suddenly we realize there are underlying trends that combine all of these in a far greater story that can no longer be reduced to, oh, the alphabet started with the Phoenicians, or the alphabet started with the Semites, or the alphabet started only in Egypt, because the story of the alphabet, which is a story of the alphabets of life, is a story that applies to the whole world.